Here are your hosts, Kyle, Fellows, and Andrew Mertig. This is the Draft Fellows Podcast. Welcome back to episode 11 of the Draft Fellows Podcast. I'm Andrew Mertig. That is Kyle Fellows, and together we are the Draft Fellows. Make sure to follow Draft Fellows channel on YouTube or check out the audio version on your favorite podcasting platform. Today, we are covering the NFC South Draft Review. If you want to check out the first 10 episodes of the series, see what we thought of all of the other divisional draft classes around the NFL, go back and check that out. You can follow the channel or audio podcast to do so. Kyle, how are you doing?
I'm doing really well. I've had a really good day, and I've been painting for like several hours leading up to this. So I've been stuck in like a 8x10 room with a lot of paint fumes. So this episode could be extra good or extra bad or just interesting all around. So I don't know how it's going to go, but how are you doing?
It's like wildly off the rails already. Yeah, really good. I mean, you know, it's... I like this because especially the NFC South, I don't know what it is about this division. There's a lot of these draft classes that I've forgotten about in the last couple of months. And so to see the way that they have sort of come together to fit in with the needs of the teams, I think is really interesting. There's a lot of draft prospects that I think we had like relatively strong opinions about. So I think it will be good to jump into this, and probably a great place to start is with the Atlanta Falcons, right?
Yeah, let's do it. Talk about
all right. Atlanta Falcons. I was looking
you didn't really
for
give me a
permission.
Choice there, so yeah, like
I was looking for permission to start, and I didn't need it. But anyways, the Falcons, of course, were the story of the first round, taking Michael Penix Jr., the quarterback out of Washington, at pick 8 overall. In the second round, they get Rook, the defensive lineman from Clemson. And then in the third round, they get Braylon Trice, the edge from Washington. In the fourth round, defensive end Brandon Dorlus from Oregon. They really like the Pac-12, huh? In the fifth round, linebacker J.D. Bertrand from Notre Dame. And 3 picks in the sixth round, running back Jason McClellan, wide receiver Casey Washington, and defensive lineman Zion Logue. So only one place to get started here, Kyle, and that is pick 8
Zion
overall.
Logue. Oh, I thought you were going to say Zion Logue.
Correct.
All right. Let's talk Michael Penix, the 8th overall pick in this draft. Still sounds crazy to say. I mean, there was buzz that maybe he could be climbing up boards, but I don't think very many people thought that he would go 8. And if he went 8, that it would still be the Falcons picking there in that slot. This is a player that has a load of arm talent, but he's a 24-year-old rookie. And so obviously we know the trajectory, the plan here is to have Kirk Cousins start there, what would feel like at least 2 seasons. And I think that was at least Cousins' plan, right? Like that he was going to be there. And so there's a lot to unpack here, lots to understand. I think they think that they did the Jordan Love thing, but there are a lot of things about this that aren't Jordan Love. Obviously, Jordan Love was picked in the 20s, and this is a team that needs to win now. Given what you just gave Kirk Cousins, you went out and acquired that player. So really, really interesting process. But the vision is certainly there for how this could end up giving him the time he needs to acclimate to the NFL and maybe make a really nice transition into the league down the road.
Yeah, I think the first thing that I want to start out with is I really like the prospect, Michael Penix. I had him at 30 overall. I don't think 8 is out of the question. If there's somebody, like that's a borderline first round grade on a quarterback. And if you think he's the guy, you take him no matter where it is, right? Like you don't mess around, try to trade down, especially the way that quarterbacks came off the board. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think the pick in general and like the whole theory of we're going to do the Jordan Love thing, I don't think that's a terrible plan. I don't think that adding a young quarterback behind Kirk Cousins, who is not only, in his mid-30s, but also coming off of the torn Achilles. You don't know how he's going to bounce back from that right away. I don't think any of that is really bad. I think the thing that stunned me, which is kind of the same thing that you heard all over the place, was that it was Michael Penix Jr. because Michael Penix Jr., one of the older prospects in this class, right? He's going to be 24 starting his rookie year.
Yeah.
And so if Kirk Cousins plays for 2 years, then you're hoping not to play Michael Penix until he's 26.
Right.
Here's where I kind of like the pick. And I know this is me being a contrarian, but that is totally fine. One, I think the previously mentioned recovery from injury is not a given. We don't know if Kirk Cousins is going to be like good to go at the beginning of the year. We don't know if this is something that he is going to aggravate at some point. And you're getting probably the most pro-ready quarterback out of this draft class. Obviously, there's a lot of players that we think have higher end ceilings, but Michael Penix ready to come in and sling it around. I think we can both agree on that. I also think, just because of the way quarterbacks are, that if you say we're going to get 2 years out of Kirk Cousins and he's going to be healthy and we're going to be contenders during that time period, and then we're going to turn it over. This isn't like turning it over to a 26-year-old running back or cornerback or even a wide receiver. At quarterback, you could still realistically think that Michael Penix, if he pans out, has 8 to 10 years in the NFL, and that is worth the number 8 overall pick when you didn't have to trade up to get it. I think the counter argument to be made here is, could the Falcons have gone with Rome Odunze and paired him alongside of Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson, and just thrown all your chips into the Kirk Cousins basket and said, okay, we're going to be unstoppable? Could you have taken an offensive lineman here? Could you have taken a cornerback? All needs for the Falcons. And I think those are legitimate arguments. But I did not dislike the Penix pick. I thought it was okay.
Can I chime in here just a second? So, interesting thing that I just thought of, all right, and I've been told I can't say this, but I'm going to. Arthur Blank is 81 years old. So, as an owner, like, he wants to win now, like, because, I mean, he's 81 years old, right? Like, he doesn't have a ton of time. Just sit back and, like, let's build for the next 5 to 10 years. So, Kirk Cousins gives you that window, right? Like, in the NFC, maybe not in other places, but in the NFC South, with Kirk Cousins, like, this is their division now. Like, I think a lot of people think that, like, this is within their realm of possibilities that they win this division for the next 3 years, the way that it's kind of laid out. Maybe you could have said, like, they should have just held off on spending all that money on Cousins and kind of, like, sunk that into the future and, like, just take the young guy. Don't try to win in both worlds here. But when you're Arthur Blank, you can kind of see it as, like, I want to compete now. But I also see the blueprint around the league. Maybe it's Jordan Love. Maybe it's other situations where it is like, let's get the young guy in the door too, so that we're planning for the future. And maybe that's a Raheem Morris thing, right? Like, he's like, hey, yeah, I want to win now too, but I want to be here for more than 3 years or whatever. And I want that plan to go well. Let's have a succession plan in place. So I don't know if I would have done it this way. I probably would have gone with the Odunze kind of a pick to really give them the ammunition they need for the next couple seasons. But when you frame it like that, and you've got an owner who's like, I haven't won for a while, I need to win now, it makes all the sense in the world.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting perspective. And we know, as Packers fans, for the Falcons, for their front office, their fans are going to be ultra critical. The national media is going to be super scrutinizing, because if they get close, if Kirk Cousins is healthy this whole time and Penix doesn't play, the criticism is going to be heavy, right? Like, what could that one more piece have done? And we lived through it. But now, as Packer fans, we're saying, okay, well, the Rodgers thing didn't work because they weren't missing one piece. I promise you, no matter how many people want to say that that was not the case. And now, as Packer fans, we're spoiled because it looks like there's another really good quarterback coming up in the ranks. And I think for Atlanta to have that hope is really nice. And we'll see how it plays out. I mean, you never know. About 50% of these top 10 to 15 quarterbacks end up busting, and we don't know who's who. I think Penix is really interesting because obviously he tested phenomenally despite
Mhm.
2 major injuries in college and the fact that he seemed like a statue in the pocket in Washington. So we'll see. Maybe he's got a little bit more juice to him than we thought, a new dynamic. He certainly can sling the ball around, and with Drake London and Kyle Pitts, that's going to be a lot of fun. So I think a lot of hope for the Falcons, both currently and down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll be interesting to see if it is to his benefit to sit and it's actually less pressure, or if it increases the pressure because he's had all that time that when he does see the field, if that's an increased amount of pressure. But we won't know. It'll be interesting to see it play out. And it could be a couple of years before we know the answer to that one. But Andrew, what about the rest of this class? Like they take some interesting guys here in Aurora, Trice, Dorless, a lot of defensive help for this team after really spending that premium pick on the offensive side of the ball. Who do you like in the rest of this class?
Yeah, I think I liked Rook a lot. I thought he was more of a third round talent than a second round talent. So I was a little surprised to see him go top of the second,
Hmm.
but
Sure.
definitely a ton of tools. He was a big time recruit coming into Clemson. I think there's a lot of upside, and you think with the new head coach that we're going to be able to get the most out of our defensive players and our young developmental defense players. And for the Falcons, they've been waiting a long time to get a little bit more interior pass rush, and continue to develop the defensive line and cause a lot of havoc in a division that doesn't necessarily have the best quarterback play across the board. So I think
Mm.
if they can improve their defense with some really good young trench players, and they certainly tried in this class, right? So
Yeah.
I think we both like Rook. I liked Braylon Trice quite a bit. I know his testing was not particularly good, but somebody who has a really nice pass rush plan. I think he's got a lot of nice tools. He's just not like a super athletic guy. So I think he's the kind of player who's going to win more with a pass rush plan, counter moves, and he's somebody that then like somebody who's super twitched up and bendy that's gonna get around the edge. But any players that you really liked out of the rest of this class?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. The rest of this class, all these players went slightly ahead of where I thought that they would. So that's not like the rule. But for me, some of these guys were a little bit surprising. Rook going at 35, you mentioned it. For me, the craziest thing here was Johnny Newton went 36, like one pick
Oh yeah.
after Rook, and I really like Johnny Newton. So that was the one that like when his name went up on the board, I was like, wait, Johnny hasn't been picked yet. So that was curious. Obviously, Newton had some injury concerns, so maybe that factored in that decision. But Braylon Trice was one of the hardest players in this class to figure out for me because I did not love him on film. I just felt like he was kind of a little bit sluggish. He reportedly played at 270 pounds, and then he showed up at Indy in the combine at 245. So not liking him because I thought he was a little bit sluggish on tape made me go like, okay, like maybe he's playing above what he's comfortable playing with. But then he only tested as a 7 RAS player. So it wasn't like he came out and tore it up after dropping 25 pounds
Yeah.
off of his playing weight. So I don't really know if anyone has a clue what Trice is going to be in the NFL because I don't know what weight we think he's going to play at or what he's going to look like when he's on the field. So lots and lots of wild cards here. I feel like Dorless could play 3 tech, 5 tech all along the defensive line. It's super interesting body style, body type at defensive end, defensive tackle. So really interesting. The guys they took at the end, Jace McClellan has gotten some buzz as a running back. Obviously, when you have guys like Bijan Robinson, he's probably not going to see the field a whole heck of a lot, but there is some talk that he may have a role in this offense already. And then Casey Washington late is kind of like a guy that a lot of people are saying could fight for that fourth wide receiver role behind Darnell Mooney and Rondale Moore and some of these guys. And Rondale Moore is on a 1-year contract. So they really like what they've seen from Casey Washington out of Illinois. And if you can hit on anybody who has any kind of a significant role, whether that's your third or fourth wide receiver in the 6th round, that's a huge win. So it's an interesting draft class. It's going to be a hard one to grade for a few seasons, but you can see how they wanted to invest a lot of talent in the defensive side of things. And we'll just have to wait and see how it plays out.
Yeah, and what I did a very poor job of articulating earlier is just like with Raheem Morris and the struggles that the front seven had for the Falcons last year. I think you throw in Rook, Braylon Trice, Dorless, Zion Logue, and then also linebacker JD Bertrand, who we didn't really touch on. And you say, okay, we have the guys in-house to coach these players up. These are going to be important parts of what we think is going to be a pretty deep rotation of pass rushers, and we're going to put a lot of pressure on you. We think our offense is going to score a lot of points, so we want to have that front seven really, really solid, and then we're going to come after you and let AJ Terrell and company, defend the pass from there. So I wasn't like super high on a lot of the players in their class. I thought everybody was probably ticked up a little bit. Trice was pretty close to where I had him graded. But overall, I can see the vision here, and I think that's the important part for the Falcons.
Yeah, I think we think that this team should be the favorite in the NFC South, and we'll just see if that takes place or not. But let's flip over, Andrew, to the Carolina Panthers. And this is another team that's 2023 did not go the way that they wanted it to. And that is probably true in lots of different ways. It starts at quarterback, but placing all the blame on the arm and the player of Bryce Young is not fair. There's a lot that needs to be corrected on this roster. And so that begins in the draft, right? Like, let's get this right through the draft. So let's, Andrew, you want to run us through this draft class and see what they did to try to get things right?
Yeah, it's really rough when you're the worst team in the NFL and then you don't have your first round pick, right? We know part of the Bryce Young trade up really hurt this draft class, but the Panthers did trade back up one spot to get into the back end of the first round. They took wide receiver Xavier Legette out of South Carolina. In the second, they grabbed running back Jonathan Brooks out of Texas. In the third round, they get linebacker Trevin Wallace out of Kentucky. In the fourth, Jatavian Sanders, the tight end out of Texas. In the fifth, they get Chow Smith-Wade, the corner out of Washington State. And then in the sixth round, defensive lineman Jaden Crumedy. And in the seventh, Michael Barrett, the linebacker from Michigan. So where do you want to get started here? Offensive weapons.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. There is a strong theme to this draft class. So let's start with Xavier Legette. This is a wide receiver class that we talked a couple shows ago, like how I think someone we were talking about was your wide receiver 8, but they were still like your 30th overall player or something crazy like that. And so I don't know where Xavier Legette stacks up for you. I think he was something like my wide receiver 11 or 12 off the top of my head. So I didn't love Xavier Legette as much as some other people did, but the things that make you excited about Xavier Legette gets you really excited. So like, he's a player who has a crazy combination of size and speed and ability to just go up and get the football. And this is Dave Canellis came from Tampa Bay in a place where he had someone like Mike Evans who could absolutely go up and get the football and be that electric spark on offense. And so I think he saw Xavier Legette in a similar light to that. So this is a player that coaches rave about. And I think that that's another factor. They want to build the culture here for the Carolina Panthers. And so I think he brings up a lot of that ability, but route limitations for sure. There's going to have to be a lot of growth here. I think Legette can absolutely be a role player for an offense almost immediately. I think his ceiling as a number 1 is going to be totally dependent on how he develops as a route runner and a complete receiver. So do you know like where you had him stacked in your wide receivers, Andrew?
Yeah, he was wide receiver 12 for me.
Okay. So
and I thought he was like a middle second round kind of player. Really, really like crazy athlete. I think there is 2 schools of thought about this. One, he is a unicorn in the fact that I don't know if there's another record of a player who did nothing for 4 years in college and then had a 5th-year breakout the way that Legette had a 5th-year breakout. Like, it's just unheard of. And we're not a fantasy football podcast, but when they try to find, like, one of the things about fantasy football analysis is they're trying to find outliers, right? Like, you can't assume a player is going to be an outlier. And, like, it's not even like, oh, this rarely happens. Like, it never happens. And so it's really interesting to see, like, was he just misused at South Carolina? Did something finally click? Or was he truly just a grown man playing amongst boys in his 5th year? And then, he was just destroying players. And once he gets to the next level, that won't be the case. For me, I've been snake bitten by too many players trying to be Deebo Samuel. And I can't get behind it anymore. But I do see the upside here, and I think he is a fun player that I think you can get some gadgety touches, and you can run a lot of 9 routes with, a lot of contested balls. And then, eventually you hope that he figures out the route tree and can develop as that kind of player.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll be fascinating. I think I've seen stealing, DK Metcalf kind of like, but thick player like that, but he
Sure.
doesn't have the body length that DK does. But it's hard to maybe because he's not Debo, but he's not DK. He'll be an interesting one to see how the usage actually takes place there in that new Carolina offense. But
But the commonality there is like he's more of an athlete than a football player right now.
correct,
And
yes.
you've seen, like Debo was kind of always more of a football player than an athlete. I will say that, but DK maybe not so much. DK just kind of figured it out, and so
Mm-hmm.
I think for some players that works, and then we have a lot of examples of players it doesn't work on. But another really interesting pick, second rounder, Jonathan Brooks, the running back out of Texas, who I think would have gone a bit higher than this, maybe snuck into the first round if he was healthy, but he is coming off of a late season injury. We don't know if he'll necessarily be ready for the start of the season, but what did you think of Jonathan Brooks?
Yeah, I really like Jonathan Brooks. If it wasn't for the injury, he probably would have been higher for me. I had him as my RB4, which I know is pretty low relative to what other people thought. But for me, it was just that I graded all these guys really similarly at the top of this class with Bucky Irving and the Florida State Benson and all these
Trey
guys.
Benson.
Yeah, and they all bunched together. It was hard for me coming off of the injury to say I have him at the top, but really close grades on all those guys. For me, his best trait was his vision. And usually when a running back's best trait is their vision, that does translate really, really well. So I think you get excited about that. I think you get excited about his usage in the passing game, what he can bring as a receiver, really kind of a complete player, really good at a lot of things, maybe not elite at any one thing. I guess one of my biggest reservations was his long speed. There are times where he gets caught from behind, and I just felt like maybe that's not there. But in the NFL, running backs don't typically run for 50 yards all that often. So like some of those things probably get, pushed under the rug and you're not too worried about it. But probably the most well-rounded player in this draft, and the patience kind of at times reminded me of a Le'Veon Bell kind of a player.
Yeah, he was my running back 3. I did give him a bit of a dock in the points for the injury, and that pushed. I thought maybe like 3rd round ish for him, but knowing the draft buzz coming in, I figured he'd probably go a little bit higher than that. I think middle of the 2nd round is a good value, and for the Panthers, kind of coming in with this Tampa Bay Dave Canales offense. That whoever the running back is going to end up being, if it's early season Miles Sanders and Chuba Hubbard, if it's Jonathan Brooks down the stretch, like they are going to be very, very involved. We saw this with Seattle and Kenneth Walker. We saw this with Tampa Bay. And who is Tampa Bay's running back? Why is the name escaping me?
White.
Yes, I
I
don't know. I'll let you dig me out of this hole. Why did I bring
White?
this up?
Is it Rashid White?
Sure.
Anyways,
so
well done.
you're right. So I mean, they're gonna utilize the running back in a lot of different ways. They're gonna run the ball a ton. They're gonna throw a lot of checkdowns. And so from a fantasy perspective, I expect Jonathan Brooks to be really, really good. I think that vision is what gives me hope. Some good hands, the ability to find the creases in defense. I think he can be highly productive for this Carolina offense and take some of that pressure off of Bryce Young as well.
Yeah.
I also really like in the 4th round them grabbing Ja'Tavion Sanders, and I can see why he slid a little bit. Like early on, he was getting some Brock Bowers is easily tight end 1, but Ja'Tavion Sanders is like maybe not that far behind him. And then people cooled considerably when they really dug into the tape. But I see somebody who's super young. He's going to be 21 for his whole rookie season. I think he is really athletic. He didn't test that well But I saw enough juice on film to get excited about what he can be. He's big. He's going to be listed right around like 6'4", mid 240s. I think he's got really good athleticism on tape, even if he didn't test well. And I think he can be a good blocker down the line. He has all the physical tools to do so. He just hasn't put it all together yet. And he's very young. It can come. So I like rolling the dice on a developmental tight end, maybe a little bit of, to use our Packer fandom here, maybe a little bit of Luke Musgrave from last year.
Interesting. Yeah, the athleticism didn't pop in the testing like I thought it might. I think he was a 5.5 RAS kind of a guy. So, but that doesn't mean he's not an athlete, right? Like really, really special athlete on the field. Andrew, this is a offensive focused draft for sure. And in my mind, they were filling some holes, right? Like might have pressed some needs a little bit. They were really excited to get Jonathan Brooks, but they also felt like the Giants were going to take him. They felt like Dallas was going to take him. If you've watched any of those videos floating around the Twitter's X, what do you call it? It used to be the Twitter sphere, but now it's the exosphere. Like, what do you call it?
Yeah, sure.
But it's
sure.
out there on
you just said sounds great.
on the interwebs. Yeah, so of them kind of working through this Jonathan Brooks pick. And they were fearful someone else was going to get him. So 46, maybe a hair early, but they wanted their guy. They got their guy. And so they've injected a wide receiver that they hope can probably be a 1, a starting running back who you can kind of run your offense through, and then a super athletic tight end. So you got to be excited about the potential if that works. The question is, will it? Andrew, there's another player in this draft class that I'm wondering if maybe is the highest graded of all of the ones as relative to where they took him. Trevin Wallace. Were you a pretty big fan of Trevin Wallace, the linebacker that they got from Kentucky?
I liked Wallace quite a bit. He was my linebacker 5, but I have him at 83 overall. So like right in the neighborhood of where they took him.
Yeah,
I think that's like perfectly good value.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, he's a guy, he's going to be 21, I think, for his whole rookie season. He's really athletic. I think, you throw him in there and you hope that like Derek Brown and the line in front of him can keep him pretty protected, because he is going to be, I think, a little bit more of a see ball, get ball kind of linebacker, and not somebody who's going to take on blocks really well. But I really liked him. I think, as an elite mover and somebody with a ton of upside, I really like that pick in the 3rd round.
Yeah, absolutely. Super explosive player, more than competent in coverage. And the speed is absolutely there. He's a 4.5 40 legit speed, 9.5 RAS. So they absolutely added an athlete to the middle of their defense, and a team captain for Kentucky as well. So getting more guys to kind of rebuild that program as they try to right the ship that didn't go so well in 2023. But Andrew, any other thoughts on the Carolina Panthers draft class before we get out of here?
No, that's about it. I think Wallace is a fun linebacker for a division where you're talking about having to deal with Kyle Pitts and Juwan Johnson and Kate Otten and the running backs, Bijan Robinson and everything. So having that kind of chess piece linebacker is a fun addition to a really offensive heavy draft.
Yeah, absolutely. So it'll be interesting. There is, between these two teams, Atlanta Falcons probably the favorites in the division, and the Carolina Panthers, who will be a great story to follow throughout the season to see if they get things figured out, if Bryce Young can get turned around, and what they do with this young draft class. But thanks for joining us today. Make sure you like and subscribe to the show, and we will continue covering each division in football over the next few weeks. We'll finish up the NFC South very soon. In the next couple of days, we'll drop that one. But from the draft room to the gridiron, the Draft Fellows have you covered. Until next time, stay tuned and stay in the game.